Hi again guys, and welcome to my 14th pick out of my series of 30 wishlist vehicles. It's a very pie-in-the-sky series with very little real-world application, but these are the top 30 vehicles. If I could choose any top 30, these would be the cars that I would love to see feature in Gran Turismo. Probably in the future. They couldn't technically be featured in the past, so it would have to be in the future. Most likely on GT7, hence the name of the series and the title of each video, rather than a GT Sport wish list. And in this particular pick, we are returning to the racing world, and we're actually featuring a car which is a classic racing car from 1968, and alongside the Chaparral 2J in particular, this car is probably my favourite race car of all time, as I said, alongside Chaparral's 2J fan car. And the car is moderately well known, not hugely popular among racing aficionados. It's kind of like electric cars in as much as people who love the technology really love it. People who don't really care. But the car is powered by my personal favourite combustion engine ever, the gas turbine. Now the beauty of a gas turbine, well, there are many of them, but one of the main advantages in particular is their weight and how compact they are, and the amount of performance and power and torque that they give you from said size and physical weight. Now when I say size, I'm not really talking capacity, because kind of like the rotary engine, it's a bit awkward to actually work out how big a gas turbine engine is in terms of cubic capacity. Now this particular race car was rated at just under 3 litres in capacity, but the guys who built it later admitted that they think it was probably more than that if it was more accurately measured. But the car was built in the Group 6 category of particularly endurance racing, but sports car racing overall, and it went up against some of the best other race cars of the time, such as GT40s, Porsches, etc. And the car uses a Continental gas turbine. It's called the TS325-1, and this engine puts out a reasonably impressive 350 horsepower. Now that probably doesn't sound all that amazing, especially up against Porsches, GT40s, Ferraris, etc. But it also puts out 650 foot-pounds of torque, and it only needs one forward gear because of the way gas turbines work and the way they deliver that power, and especially the way they deliver that torque. Now the engine is extremely high revving, as most turbines are, if not all, redlining at just under 60,000 RPM, or roughly 4 times the redline of a modern Formula 1 car, and this was in 1968. It's in a car which is relatively lightweight and relatively compact, and as I said, gas turbine engines are very light. How light are they though? Well, to give it some context and some perspective of how remarkable gas turbine engines are for their size and weight, the Mazda 13B rotary engine, which is their most famous rotary engine as used in the RX-7, weighs in at roughly 122 kilos, not including its liquids. 122 kilos. Now that's lightweight. The Nissan GTR engine, with some extra components, weighs well over 250 kilos. So Mazda's RX-7 Wankel engine is a lot lighter in comparison. But this gas turbine engine weighs 77 kilos, which is frankly insanely light for an engine that produces 350 horsepower and 650 foot-pounds of torque and only needs a single gear. The car does also have reversing capabilities, not through a gearbox though, but rather through an electric motor, And the performance that the car had was good in certain ways, not so good in others. By the nature of a gas turbine, and I have discussed them before on the channel, I've actually discussed this car before as well on the channel in my Appreciation of Innovation series, they do have very distinct advantages, but also very significant disadvantages. They're far from being perfect, and one of the main problems with gas turbine powered vehicles, cars and motorbikes especially, is that unfortunately there just hasn't been enough development put into them. Teams don't spend the time, development and effort required to really make them as good as they deserve to be. If more teams and more manufacturers actually spent the same time in working with gas turbines that they do with other engines, they would be insanely good. They would completely be dominating the racing scene by now, which is kind of a good thing that they haven't, because they'd probably be banned. Now, as far as I'm aware, gas turbines aren't banned in most racing. I may be wrong about that, but I don't think they are. I believe they're just not used because of their disadvantages. And their disadvantages include things like extreme heat. Because when I say gas turbine, to those who are unfamiliar with how a gas turbine works, this isn't an engine that shoots monstrous flames out the back like some kind of jet or drag car. It's actually a lot more toned down than that. Technically speaking, that would be a ramjet engine or a rocket engine. Gas turbines work in a very similar way to essentially a really large turbo. In a normal piston engine, you could fit a turbo to the engine to make it more powerful. And what that turbo does is provides the engine with huge amounts of very highly compressed oxygen. It allows the engine to breathe better, in effect. And a supercharger does the exact same thing. The difference with a gas turbine is that instead of having a turbo on your engine, a gas turbine is essentially a massive turbo. The entire engine is basically a turbo. Now, it's obviously a bit more complicated than that, but that's the rough idea of how a turbine looks and how it works. Ultra compact, huge power, huge torque, very distinctive sound as well, a constant high-pitched whistle, and gas turbine engines just haven't been used enough. Throughout the history of motorsport, there have only been a handful of cars that have used them. The Lotus Type 56, the STP Special Indy car, this one, the Howmet TX, and one or two others from Rover BRM, but not many at all. And there's only been, to my knowledge, one motorcycle to use a gas turbine engine, which is incidentally also my favourite motorbike in the world, the MTT Y2K, which also happens to be by far the fastest production motorbike ever made, and interestingly the fastest production street vehicle ever made, car or bike, for sheer acceleration, being capable of hitting 227 miles per hour in 15 seconds. Now, in this car, it didn't have the advantage that the bike has of multiple gears. Plus, we're talking 1968 technology, so it did experience quite a few mechanical issues with overheating. In one race, debris went into the engine and caused it to rattle free from its own mounts. Unfortunate things like that, but that's no fault to the turbine. That can happen to any car. It's just unfortunate that those kind of things did happen. And they did happen quite often to turbine-powered cars, and some of that was due to the excessive heat that they produce, etc., and the fact that most mechanics aren't used to working with gas turbine engines. Even those who love them, there just aren't enough cars to have a thorough enough knowledge of them to make them work perfectly. Now, this car, that being said, is, interestingly, the most successful gas turbine racing car ever. Of the very few that there have been, this is the only gas turbine race car to actually win a race. It actually won 2 events. And that automatically makes it the most important gas turbine powered car in history. GranTurismo has a track record, especially in the older games, of including very historically significant cars, like the Ford Model T, the Patent Motor Wagon, the 787B, etc. Vehicles which are very, very historically important. What could be more important than the only race-winning gas turbine-powered race car ever. A precedent has now been set on GranTurismo to include alternative engine technologies with the Chaparral Vision GT car, which, although is technically laser-powered, has a very similar sound and very similar power delivery to a gas turbine. It sounds very much like one, albeit without the popping noises of the laser, and the way it delivers that acceleration in a smooth, single-speed and relentlessly building way. That is what this car would feel like on the game. Obviously it wouldn't be quite as quick as the Chaparral, being a 350 horsepower car with the top speed more in the region of 170 to 180. Compared to that car, it wouldn't feel that quick, obviously, but it certainly wouldn't be slow. As far as being competitive on GranTurismo, unfortunately there aren't many cars from that era for it to race against. Most of them that are on the game from that era tend to be the more powerful models, like the Ferrari P4, the GT40, and the Jaguar XJ13. But on the right track, especially circuits that require more top-end performance rather than twisty circuits where the turbine can't really get up to speed as well as it needs to, the Howmet could do really well against those cars, especially if we could upgrade it on the game. I'm not sure exactly what kind of upgrades we'd be allowed to do, if any, and having essentially an untunable single-speed gearbox would mean that, as far as top speed, what you get is pretty much what you get. But GranTurismo also has a track record of having unrealistic top speeds. So being a 170 or 180 mile per hour car in real life would probably allow the car to do about 210 on the game because of how unrealistic it is. As far as handling, it's pretty good. For low-end performance, it pretty much never wheel spins because of the nature of the engine. It's a little bit sluggish in low-end corners, but once it gets going, it really is a monster. And the fact that it has 2 victories to its name proves that it can win. Gas turbines can be used to achieve victory. And although this is the only car to actually win, there have been other gas turbine powered race cars that came very close but had very unfortunate mechanical mishaps. But to all intents and purposes, for sheer performance, which is the most important thing on GranTurismo, being that reliability is irrelevant, they have the potential. And this car actually won the Marlboro 500 event by around 11 laps, showing exactly how quick the car is. So as far as PP and price, I think this car should probably have a PP in the region of around 550, maybe a little bit less, possibly around 530, 540, something like that. And as far as price, well, it's historically significant and it uses a completely unique and very exciting engine type, so I think it would be a pretty expensive car. It's also a highly experimental vehicle, hence the name TX, or Turbine Experimental. So price-wise, I would personally like to see it cost, say, 7.5 million credits, because there aren't many cars that are around that level. The Ferrari 250 GT is pretty much the only one, and it's an appropriately unique price. 10 million seems a little bit too steep. 5 million doesn't really give it the credit that it's due. So 7 million to 7.5, I would say, is about right for this car. And I would happily spend that kind of money for this seriously significant historical racer. But that's it overall for this particular pick of race car, the 1968 Howmet TX. And I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.